Hey everybody, it's Professor Victor. I'm just out here by myself enjoying nature. Nothing could possibly go wrong, could it? We'll talk about it at the Horror Movie Syllabus. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and downright notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the syllabus, I highly recommend you check out our introduction video. We'll leave a link to that in the description below, and it'll explain to you how the horror movie syllabus works and what we're all about. But in short, what we do is we take a particular subgenre of horror and we examine 3 movies from that subgenre. Today, as you might have been able to tell from my surroundings, we are talking about nature and isolation. And while I'm not really deep in nature right now, I am outside and I am by myself. And after seeing the movies that we're about to talk about, you might understand why that's about as close to nature and isolation as I feel like getting. Now, when we talk about the nature and isolation subgenre, what we're really talking about are horror movies where the protagonists, or the victims, if you will, are in a situation where the environment around them, nature, is basically the threat. That is the thing that is causing the problem or the danger for them. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about animal horror films. We talked about how oftentimes the animal that is antagonizing our main characters is often supplemented by a situation or environmental concern that adds to the situation or adds to the danger. For example, when we talked about Cujo, we talked about how the rabid dog was the threat, but also our protagonists were trapped in a car in the heat with no water and no way to get help. So the environment played a significant part, even though the dog was the main antagonist. When we talk about nature and isolation, we're kind of talking about the inverse of that. A lot of the movies that we'll talk about today will have the environment being the primary threat, but we'll also have like an animal or creature or something as a secondary threat that adds to the danger as well. So it's kind of the inverse of that situation. On that note, it's worth noting that the 3 selections for the horror movie syllabus are arguably able to be fit into other subgenres, like the animal subgenre or a creature subgenre, something like that. And yet we're putting them in nature and isolation. And the reason for that is because I felt like the natural threat, the environmental threat, was the primary threat, and the animals or whatever were secondary. That they were not the scary part. And to me, the environmental issue, the natural threat, was the real threat, the real thing to be afraid of. And I'll explain that more as we talk about the movies. But I wanted to make it clear that all the movies we're talking about here, you might argue fit into other subgenres, and you would not be wrong. But I'll have to justify why I've put them here. On a related note to that, we've organized them into categories like we usually do: undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level. And in this case, they are ranked in the order of how scary they are to me. They hit me personally in a certain way, so your order may vary. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into these movies. The first movie we're talking about today, the undergraduate selection, is Frozen. And before you start singing Let It Go, we're not talking about that Frozen. We're not talking about the Disney movie. This is the 2010 movie made by Adam Green. That is, if you're not familiar, the story of 3 friends that go skiing and wind up getting trapped on a ski lift inadvertently by accident without anybody knowing they're still on there. And the slopes are closing down, so they have no way to get help. They have no way to get down. So that's what we're dealing with this movie. It has nothing to do with Disney princesses. And it is an extremely effective horror film. One of the things that I really like about this movie is how the setup works. The way that they show how easy it would be for this to happen is the part that probably freaks me out the most. Now, I'm not a big skier, and that's why this movie freaks me out the least of the 3 we're going to talk about. I haven't gone skiing in maybe 30 years, but I do like it, and I would go again. It's just I don't go very often. I live in California, But the way that this shakes out, where our three protagonists go in for one last run, they start going up the slope on the ski lift, and then there's a shift change because they're getting ready to close. And the person who hands off the other person says there are three more people who are going to come down, and then three people do come down, and he gets confused and thinks that those are the last three people and shuts it down. Such an easy mistake, so easy for that to happen, and that freaks me out because of how realistic it is. And you'll see that as a theme throughout these movies that we're going to talk about, how realistic it is to wind up in a situation like this. Now, Adam Green, who directed this, is a very good director, and we've talked about him before when we talked about the Hatchet film series in our Slasher Icons video. Adam Green is the director of that series, and he's great. He's really good. He knows how to deliver a good scary movie, and Frozen is a perfect example of that. The movie is well paced. It's well acted. The cast is really, really good. In particular, I like that Sean Ashmore is one of the characters, and I think that's just kind of a funny little in joke because Sean Ashmore, for those of you who don't know, is in the X-Men movies. He plays the character Iceman, and now he's worrying about freezing to death in this movie, and I just find that kind of funny. But what works with this movie is and this is how a successful nature and isolation movie tends to work, is it kind of addresses all of the things that you would try to do and then shows you why they won't work. So you'll think, okay, I'm stuck on the ski lift. It doesn't look like it's that far down and there's snow at the bottom. Maybe I'll jump down. No, that's not going to work, and it shows you why. Okay, well, maybe I'll crawl along the cable and then get to the post and climb down that way. And no, that's not going to work, and it's going to show you why. And it keeps giving you explanations or reasons of why you would not necessarily be able to get out of this as easily as you think. It's an old horror trope that people will think that the characters on screen do something stupid and they would be able to get out of it. This movie does a decent job of kind of showing you, you think you could get out of this, you probably couldn't. Now, as I alluded to at the beginning of the video, there is a secondary threat in here, and that is wolves. Not only are our three protagonists stuck on a ski lift, some 40 feet or whatever above the ground, and unable to be rescued, and there's a storm coming in, and they're getting colder and colder, and they're having to deal with freezing to death or starving to death or anything. But there's also wolves waiting down below in case they actually do manage to get down. They'd have to deal with the wolves. And, that's a fun additional threat, but I'll be honest with you, care not about the wolves. The wolves don't scare me. The freezing to death, being stuck out there, that's pretty scary. That's pretty freaky. How easy this could happen? Pretty freaky. Wolves wanting to eat me doesn't seem like it's a very likely scenario. But me getting stuck on a ski lift, that seems like it could happen, and that's the part that freaks me out, and that's why it's in Nature and Isolation. That's why it's making the list. It doesn't feel like a wolf movie to me. It doesn't feel like an animal horror movie to me where we're worrying about the wolves. They are a secondary concern. They are a danger for sure, and the movie explores that. Spoiler alert. But the getting stuck on there, the freezing to death, and no hope of being rescued, being stuck by yourself out there in the harsh environment. That's scary to me. That's the part that really freaks me out. And that's what resonated with me in this movie. Again, I tip my hat to Adam Green because he's done an excellent job of putting you in that situation and making you feel like that's something that can happen to you, and what would you do, and how would you handle it. I love it. I absolutely love it. Side note, we talked about Adam Green directing the Hatchet movies. If you watch those, look out for the Easter egg in one of the movies. I think it's in the second one, where there's a news report in the background about this incident in Frozen, indicating that they are, in fact, a shared universe. I did not put them in the shared universe subgenre, but it's a fun little Easter egg just to point out for those of you that might care. But if you haven't seen Frozen, or if you've only seen the Disney version of Frozen, give this one a chance and let me know what you think of it, because I think it's a very effective, creepy little film. Like I said, it's not going to be, something like, The Exorcist or something like that. It's not going to really bully you over scariness, but if you can let yourself get caught up in that situation, if you're afraid of something like that, like I kind of am, this movie could be very effective for you. It could really hit for you. So give it a shot. And if you have friends that want to see the Disney version of Frozen, trick them into watching this one. It might be a fun night. They may not be your friends afterwards, but that would be kind of fun. But Frozen, I really like it. Give it a chance. The next movie we're talking about today, the graduate level selection, is Open Water. As you can tell from the cover alone, Open Water is a shark movie, and I love me some shark movies. Well, why didn't I put this in the shark subgenre? Because honestly, the sharks aren't what scare me in this movie. If you're unfamiliar with it, Open Water tells the story of a couple that decides to go on vacation and go scuba diving, and they go on this guided tour with a bunch of other people on a scuba diving expedition on a boat. And while they're out there scuba diving, they kind of get away from the group a little bit. And when everybody else comes back on the boat, the people running the tour do a miscount, and they count somebody twice. So they think they have everybody on the boat, and they leave. And then our protagonists come up from the water from their scuba diving, and there's no boat anywhere, and they're just in the middle of the ocean, trapped, alone. And then, yes, eventually sharks come. But I don't care about the sharks. They're trapped in the ocean alone. There's no place to go. They don't even know which way to swim because they don't even know which way land is. They're so far from land, they can't see it. They have no idea what to do. And they're going to drown, or they're going to starve, or they're going to get eaten by sharks. This movie was terrifying for me. Little bit of personal information about me. I don't like the water. I just don't like it. I can swim, but I don't like the water. And it's not my bag. I don't like it. So this movie really, really freaked me out. The idea of being in the ocean at all is a problem for me, even on a boat, frankly. But being in the ocean with nothing around you, no idea where to go, and knowing that you are going to drown, you're going to die. You're going to drown, or you're going to starve. That's terrifying. That absolutely terrifying to me. I think I would rather be eaten by sharks, frankly, than have that fate. That's really disturbing to me. And it's a big reason why I love this movie, and a big reason why I made the syllabus in this category as the graduate level selection. Now, purportedly, the movie is based on a true story, and that's a little bit wonky, or a little bit. It's a little. They're playing with some liberties on that. It's a kind of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of claim, or maybe not quite that bad. But basically, what they're really saying is they found a camera in a shark's belly, and kind of extrapolated from that this story. But the story is largely made up, you know. But that said, that shouldn't take away from the movie. The movie is still very, very effective. You've got two leads they're giving good performances, but really it's the situation that really resonates, and they do a good job of letting that terror, that resignation of fate creep into them. And then you throw some sharks into the mix. You know I love me some sharks. If you've seen the shark video, you know I love sharks. So that's just like the cherry on top of this thing. This movie freaks me out so much, and I understand that it may not hit the same for other people. If you don't have any particular fear of the water, or particular fear of sharks or anything like that, this movie may not hit for you. So I understand that this might be a little bit more my biased or skewed perspective, but hey, it's my channel. What am I going to do here? But I love Open Water. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Now, it does have a couple of sequels. They franchised it, and the franchise is more like, just kind of going off in shark movies. It doesn't have the same gravitas, I guess, as the original movie. It doesn't hit the same for me. They're enjoyable because I'm a bit of an easy lay for shark movies, water movies, all that. So it's kind of in my sweet spot, my wheelhouse. And they're fine, but they're not as good as the original. So I'm not take them or leave them. But the original movie is, in my opinion, fantastic. It's not a masterpiece of filmmaking. It's a low budget movie, but it's perfectly competently made. It's shot fairly well, considering the vast majority of the movie takes place in the ocean by itself, just floating around out there. Given that, I think the movie is actually, very effective, very good. Really hits me in my sweet spot for sure. So for me, it's a must-see. For you, you've heard my explanation of it. Let me know if you think it's something that's for you. Check it out if you think it's something you would like. If you've seen it, let me know what you think of it too. I'm pretty effusive about it, so if there's somebody out there who wants to have a little bit more of a balanced perspective on it, that'd be great for us. Let us all know in the comments what you think about it. But Open Water, to me, it's a great one. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. And the last movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is The Descent. Now, The Descent is the movie where I am really kind of pushing it the most with regards to nature and isolation. A lot of people are going to look at that and say, that is a monster movie, for sure. What are you doing putting it in this subgenre? So give me an opportunity to explain. But first, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, The Descent is a 2005 movie about a group of women that go cave exploring, go spelunking. And there's some drama that's involved in that too, that leads to some of the plot points. But what you really need to know is they go spelunking in a cave that has not been explored before, is not on the maps. So they're in a place where they're not supposed to be. And then there's a cave in, and they get trapped in the cave, and they can't get out. And so they're trying to find a way out. And then they come across some creatures. And that's why people will say that this movie is more of a creature feature than it is a nature and isolation movie. And hijinks abound from that point on, and we won't spoil it for you. But the movie taught me something about myself that I didn't necessarily realize, which is I might be a little bit claustrophobic. I didn't notice about myself. I've been in elevators in small spaces, like a small room, stuff like that. I've never really had an issue or anything like that. This movie made me realize that if I can't move, like if I can't move my arms, if I am like confined, that's a problem. That's something that's going to make me panic. And when the women get trapped in this cave, there are some scenes where they are in some incredibly narrow, tight spaces, and they can't do much more than wiggle, and that terrified me. That I had a visceral reaction to that. That really freaked me out. So that's why I'm putting it here in Nature and Isolation, because the environment that they find themselves in was what scared me about this movie. The creatures were the creatures. I've seen plenty of monster movies, and these creatures are pretty good. But to me, they felt like a secondary threat. You could have left the creatures out of this movie just like you could have left the sharks out of Open Water, and you could have left the wolves out of Frozen, and had, to me, still an excellent, compelling horror movie. If this movie was just about these women trying to get out of the cave, this would have still been a fantastic movie. But as it stands, it is maybe the best movie of that decade, of the 2000s. It's fantastic. And I know there's some people that don't love it, but a lot of people are pretty effusive about this movie, and for good reason. It's really, really well made. It's got a fantastic cast. It's also, side note, a cast of all women, which you don't see in horror too often. And that was done by design. It's arguable whether or not you would call this a feminist horror movie. I actually thought about putting it in the feminism subgenre, but there's some debate as to whether or not it really is a true feminist take, given some of the dramatic subplots of the movie. But it is refreshing to see a group of women in this film, and they are all kind of, well, they're not all deeply explored as characters. They're all individuals. They're not really caricatures, and that's a refreshing take on this. And it makes the movie that much more enjoyable, because you do see these women differently as individuals, and kind of get to know them a little bit. And so you feel for them, and you care for them, and you're locked in with them. It's a really key component to what makes this movie work so well. The other thing that I think makes the movie work so well is something that I've already been alluding to, which is the environment itself. It's shot very well, and it really puts you in those tight spaces. It really makes you feel like you're trapped down there too. Again, like the second part of the movie, that or the last act of the movie really is about monsters and things. And it's great. Don't get me wrong. The monsters are scary. They're awesome. And this movie goes into some nuts spaces. It really goes crazy. It really is terrifying. But man, they had me right when the cave-in happened. I was freaked out already, and there's that part where they're going through that little tunnel. Gets me every time. Even just thinking about it kind of freaks me out, to be honest with you. It really does. And that's why I put it in the postgraduate spot, because this movie really freaks me out. Fortunately, for whatever reason, other people feel the same way, whether it's because of the claustrophobia feeling about it, the being trapped in a cave, being isolated, or if it is the monsters that freak them out. People get scared by this movie. People like this movie, and with good reason. It's really good. It's well made. It's well acted. It has a great premise to it. It feels fresh and original, even though at the end of the day you can boil it down to being a creature feature. It feels fresh and original. I love this movie. It's definitely one of my favorite horror movies of the 2000s, for sure. And if I were to make a top 10 of my favorite horror movies of all time, and maybe I will do that one day, I don't know if this would make the top 10, but it would be a contender. It's that good. And one of the things that's interesting about this movie, what it's noteworthy for, is that it has different endings depending on if you saw the US version or the UK version. Now, I don't want to spoil the endings, but let's just say that the US version had a happy ending-ish. Positive ending. We'll call it a positive ending, or an upbeat ending. And the UK version undercuts that and gives it a much more bleak ending, a darker ending for sure. And most people will tell you the UK version's ending is better. And I'm one of them for sure. The UK version's ending is definitely the superior ending. But here's what's interesting about it. The movie has a sequel. And the sequel doesn't make sense if you have the UK ending. It really is predicated on the US ending. It kind of uses that as a launching off point. It is a direct sequel, which I do appreciate it being a direct sequel. But other than that, it's an unnecessary sequel because of the UK ending. If you like the UK ending, you are kind of disappointed there's a sequel at all because it doesn't make any sense to have a sequel with the UK ending. But if you have the US ending, if that's what you've seen, then yeah, the sequel makes sense. I'd still say it's arguably unnecessary. It's just kind of retreading some of the ground that you've had before, and with a little bit less of the claustrophobia. Everything just kind of feels lesser. I don't know if that's because of different change in behind the camera, or if it's just you've seen it already, or I don't know what it is, but it doesn't really quite work. And then the consensus generally is that the sequel is lesser, if good at all, and by most accounts unnecessary, especially if you're going with the UK ending. So if you haven't seen The Descent, definitely strong recommend that you see The Descent, and if possible, see the UK ending. I believe the DVD, like the one I have, has both on there. But if you have an option to choose which one you actually watch the UK one for sure. And you can forget about the sequel, but just see the original. It's really a masterful movie. It really hits really well. It's an excellent film. It's one of my favorite horror films. This is one, if people are looking for horror movie suggestions and they don't really have a sensibility to watch movies from the 80s or the 70s, this is usually what I'll go with. I'll say, hey, here's a more modern movie. It's got modern movie making techniques and pacing and stuff like that. And you will enjoy this. This movie is creepy. It's scary. It's gory. It's got all the good stuff, man. So if you haven't seen The Descent, please check it out and let me know what you think. So that's going to do it for our exploration into the nature and isolation horror subgenre. But here's a few extra credit movies to keep exploring if you like this kind of stuff. The first movie we're going to talk about is M. Night Shyamalan's The Happening. And please don't stop the video or hit dislike or unsubscribe. Let me explain. And those of you who've watched the horror movie Syllabus a bit know that I love me some Shyamalan. I'm a bit of a Shyamalan apologist, and I'm going to be kind of apologizing for him here, admittedly. But if we're going to talk about movies where nature is the antagonist, you kind of have to talk about The Happening because it's quite literally nature versus man. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, the movie is about plants attacking people. Basically, they're releasing some sort of like toxin or something into the air that causes people to kind of go insane and, generally speaking, kill themselves. And it's kind of ludicrous and dumb. I'm not going to lie to you. Most of you probably haven't seen the movie and probably have just seen like the Mark Wahlberg meme from the movie instead, which is pretty funny actually. The movie, it's hard to take it terribly seriously, but it tries to take itself very seriously. And that's what makes it kind of fun. You kind of have to watch it as a camp classic with a tongue in cheek because it's trying so hard to be scary and serious. And it's just falling so short because it's a somewhat of a ridiculous premise. And it's got actors that aren't really convincing you of it, namely Mark Wahlberg, although Zooey Deschanel not necessarily doing her best work either. And you have a master filmmaker who's been indulged too much by this point. And I say that because I do love me some Shyamalan, and there are some scenes, especially early in this movie, that are very effective. Especially some of the suicide scenes. Really creepy. Really well shot, well done, and sets a really great mood. Unfortunately, it doesn't permeate or sustain throughout the rest of the film. The movie gets dumber and dumber as time goes on. And again, some of the actors' acting doesn't really help that matter at all. And as a result, the movie went to being kind of a joke. It's really not tremendously scary. It starts out pretty scary. It doesn't sustain. Unless you can like really set yourself into this idea of this like apocalyptic potential of nature fighting back and kind of coming to get us. Maybe then that might be effective, but it didn't hit for me that way, and I think for most people it really doesn't. It when it comes off a little bit campy and schlocky. it's got a very obvious environmental message. It's kind of hitting you over the head with it, and not so it's not a very effective environmental message. But yeah, I appreciate the effort. I'll give you an A for effort on that one, Knight. It's not subtle. It's not nuanced. It does not have the artfulness and masterfulness of the earlier films, some of the films we've talked about earlier, Sixth Sense in particular. But it can be fun if you'll let it be fun. Watch it with some friends, have some drinks. It can be a fun movie to watch. But I have to mention it because it's more notorious than anything else. People love to make fun of this movie. People like to reference this movie as a silly movie. And if we're talking about movies about nature, how can you leave it out? So I'm mentioning it here. Like I said, I'm recommending it for a silly good time, but it's not a great movie. I admit it. I love me some Shyamalan, but it is not his best work. It's not his worst work, but it's not his best work. So do with that what you will. Happening. The next movie we're going to talk about is The Ruins, which interestingly came out the same year as The Happening, 2008, and has a kind of a similar premise in the sense that it's actual plants trying to kill people. If you're not familiar with it, if you haven't seen it, The Ruins is about a group of American tourists that go into the jungle to see some Mayan ruins and are accosted by some tribal people that are afraid of the ruins, or more specifically, the vines around the ruins. They don't want to go near the people because the people have touched the vines, and they're afraid of the vines. And for good reason, because the vines are hostile, and they attack the people. And we'll leave it there in case you haven't seen it. I don't want to spoil too much. But suffice to say, the vines are dangerous, and they do some really horrible things to the people. And this movie is super gory. So I just said that the Happening is a ridiculous premise that you can't take very seriously. The Ruins kind of proves me wrong on that because while the nature of the threat is a little bit different, they're both coming from plants, but one's an airborne toxin, the other one is the plants literally attacking you. And that sounds dumb. It sounds stupid, but it really isn't because of the gore. The gore in this movie is top notch. It really goes there. It's some gruesome stuff in this movie, not for the faint of heart. So that's what makes this movie so effective, is that it takes, again, a silly premise, which, by the way, comes from a book, I think, of the same name. And if you think it's a silly premise in a movie, God help you, it must be a silly premise for the book. But from all accounts, the book's actually supposed to be pretty good. But the silly premise winds up being very effective. You've got some good actors selling it, which helps a lot, including Jenna Malone, my girl Jenna Malone. I'm a big Jenna Malone fan, even though she doesn't get a whole lot to do. She elevates everything she's in. I'm a fan of hers. But all the actors in this movie are quite good. And they're selling this premise. And then what else helps to sell the premise is the special effects, the gore effects, the makeup, with the CGI. All of it works really, really well. It's not all 100% perfect. Again, the movie's like 13 years old now, but it works really, really well. The grossness is gross. And so it also has a little bit of a touch of like the paranoia from like The Thing, people kind of trying to turn on each other as they're trapped, again, isolated in these ruins, or on these ruins more specifically, dwindling water supply, no way to get away. The nature itself is the threat, but the environment is not just, attacking them, but is also trapping them. And they're going to die of starvation or heat exhaustion if they can't get away from these vines and if the vines don't get them. So you got a lot going on in this movie. It works really, really well. This is one that a lot of people have heard of, and it seems to be pretty popular. So you may have already seen it. If you have, let us know what you think of it in the comments below. But if you haven't seen The Ruins and you've got a stomach for some gross stuff, check that one out. I think you won't be disappointed. The last movie we're going to talk about is called Black Rock. And Black Rock came out in 2012, and it's maybe lesser known than some of these other movies. It's not as famous or well known, but it does have its fans, and I'm definitely one of them. If you haven't seen it, or if you're unfamiliar with it, the movie follows three friends from childhood who have some interpersonal issues and have kind of gone their separate ways, but they've come back together again to go visit this small, secluded island that they used to hang out at as children, and to kind of try to reconnect with their childhood and reconnect their friendship. And while they're there, they come across some hunters, and it runs afoul. It goes poorly after that. It does not go smoothly. And I don't want to say too much more, obviously, because I don't want to spoil the movie. Suffice to say that the wilderness that they're on in this deserted island it's a small island. There's no food. It's cold. It's wet, and there's nothing out there to help them. Is kind of like the primary threat, but it's really the isolation aspect of it. Being trapped on this island with nobody there but you and these hunters that you've run afoul of, that are out to get you. That's the setup for the movie, and that's where your threat comes in. This movie shares some parallels with like Deliverance, for example. That would probably be the good analogy or comparable to use for this movie. Only it's with women other than men. Women doing a bonding thing rather than men. So it actually is a very good comp with Deliverance. Now, what I would say about Black Rock is that, like Deliverance, there's some stuff in here that could be a little triggering. So I want to give you a heads up about that. But I don't think it's so triggering. Like, I think that even if you are sensitive to things like sexual assault, things like that, you could probably roll with this movie still pretty well. I would also say this is another movie where I was tempted to kind of maybe put it as a feminist movie because it shows some strong portrayals of these women. But there's also, because of the interpersonal dramas that they're dealing with, maybe undercuts that a little bit. So I was a little unclear about, is this a feminist movie or not? Well, yes and no, maybe. But another thing that I like about this movie is that it's written by Mark Duplass. And we've talked about him previously when we talked about the movie Creep, for example. You know that I'm a Mark Duplass fan. I really like him. I found him when I started watching the show The League, and I've talked about that before. It's a comedy show, so I don't want to go off topic, but I really like him in that. And his wife, Katie Selton, is in that show as well, and she's my favorite character in that show. She's not only the star of this movie, she came up with the story idea and she directed it. So her husband wrote the script based on her story, and she directed it, and she directs the hell out of this movie. I need to look up and see what else she's directed, because I don't think of her as a director. I think of her as an actor, and a really good one, by the way. But she is great in this movie, both in her performance, but also in her direction. This movie is a nice, lean thriller. It really is. It starts pretty quickly by establishing the characters, and it's got some witty dialogue, and they make them very likable and makes them intriguing. And it doesn't take too long to get to the inciting incident, and from there on, it goes. It's one of those situations where you're trying to figure out what you would do, and sometimes you realize what you would do is going to be wrong and it wouldn't work. And it's very effective at kind of putting you in that situation and letting you think about how you would try to survive there. It's a survivalist movie, and it's a really good one. And the fact that it's directed by a woman who I think of usually with comedic stuff, was a refreshing and exciting thing to note. So I just pointed out here for those of you who might care. Female directed, female perspective for a movie with female protagonists. But that means, if you're not into that, if you're a dude, that shouldn't affect you at all. This movie's still going to work for you because it's really, really good. The acting across the board is good. It's also got, aside from Katie Sutton, it's got Kate Bosworth and Lake Bell, who are both really good. I'm strangely not a Lake Bell fan, but every time I see her, I think she's really good. So maybe I am a Lake Bell fan. I just don't realize it. I don't know. Kate Bosworth, who I always like, she's really good. They all give great performances here. They get put through the ringer. This is not a glamorous film by any stretch of the imagination. This is not a film that's trying to play off on sex appeal, really. I think the women do have sex appeal. It's not really relying on that. It really is just a movie that is it's kind of trying to punch you in the face a little bit, and I think it's effective in doing that. Again, this is a movie that's a little lesser known, so you might not have heard about it, and if you haven't, and if you've never seen it before, check it out and let me know what you think. It's one of those movies where you could maybe argue it's more thriller than horror, and we're getting to that video real soon. But I feel like it's a horror movie. I call it a horror movie. I think it's got a horrific element to it. I think it puts you in a horrific situation, just like pretty much all the other movies we've talked about here. The situation is the horror. All the antagonists and stuff like that are secondary. So check it out if you haven't seen it. Let me know what you think. Do you think this is a good movie? Do you think it's a scary movie? Do you think it's a feminist movie? I'd really like to hear your opinion about it in the comments below. So that's going to do it for Nature in Isolation. Thank you for indulging in me filming outside. It's actually a lovely day. It's been pretty hot out here, but today's pretty nice. And if the background noise has been a little bit wonky, either if it's a little too loud or if it's weird when I do edits that the background noise changes a little bit, thank you for bearing with that. I thought I'd try something a little bit different. You guys have seen the background with the movies behind me for so long. Thought you'd like a change of pace, so I figured I'd try something a little bit different here and see how it goes. Let me know what you think of that in the comments as well. But I hope you enjoyed our exploration into nature and isolation. I hope you appreciated hearing a little bit about me and some of the stuff that freaks me out a little bit. A little bit about water, a little bit about claustrophobia and caves. Hope you appreciated that. I'll be able to share a little bit about myself with you. Please, if you are so inclined, feel free to share what scares you in the comments down below too. Do these things scare you? Are there other things about natural environments that scare you? Other phobias that you might have? Let us know in the comments. We're all friends. With that, we're going to go ahead and call it a video. But thanks again for your participation and your viewing, and thanks for your support. As always, class dismissed.